WASP, Women Air Force Service Pilots of World War II. In 1942, as the country reeled from the attack on Pearl Harbor, trained male pilots were in short supply. Qualified pilots were needed to fight the war. The Army also was desperate for pilots to deliver newly built trainer aircraft to the flight schools in the South. 28 experienced civilian women pilots volunteered to take those ferrying jobs. WASP flew every aircraft in the Army's arsenal. In addition to ferrying, they towed gunnery targets, transported equipment and non-flying personnel, and flight-tested aircraft that had been repaired before the men were allowed to fly them again. For over 2 years, the WASP went on to perform a wide variety of aviation-related jobs and to serve at more than 120 bases around the country. In 1944, at the height of World War II, more than 1,000 women left their homes and jobs for the opportunity of a lifetime to become the first in history to fly for the U.S. military. They volunteered as civilian pilots in an experimental Army Air Corps program to see if women could serve as pilots and relieve men for overseas duty. These women became the Women Air Force Service Pilots of World War II, better known as the WASP, under the determined leadership of Jacqueline Cochran, Nancy Harkness Love, and General Henry Hap Arnold. The WASP exceeded beyond all expectations. The WASP sprang from two roots that first was the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, approved in September 1942, and headed by Nancy Love, an experienced pilot and civilian member of the Air Transport Command Ferrying Division. Applicants to the squadron were required to have 500 hours flying time and a 200 horsepower rating. Second was the Women's Flying Training Detachment, created in November 1942, and headed by Jacqueline Cochran. Located at Avenger Field, Texas, the WFTD trained women with varying pilot experience, eventually down to a minimum of 35 hours, to fly the Army way. Over time, the curriculum went through many changes to become a virtual duplicate of the aviation cadet program. Both groups were under civil service, but Cochran had in mind militarization with eventual commissions for her graduates, who would serve in many domestic flying roles, including ferrying aircraft. Against the wishes of both women, WASPs initially were restricted to daylight flights and liaison aircraft and primary trainers. Nancy Love broke that barrier by wangling permission to check out in B-17s and P-51 Mustangs. Cochran did her part by convincing Gen. Henry H. Hap Arnold, Commanding General of U.S. Army Air Forces, that her graduates could tow targets as well as ferry aircraft. At an anti-aircraft training base, the WASPs flew tired, badly maintained A-24 and A-25 dive bombers. 2 women lost their lives because of engine failure, and several were hit by ground fire, but others volunteered for that risky business, which few male pilots wanted. Now that the barriers were down, the WASPs began flying and transport in USAF's inventory. By late 1944, half of ferrying division's fighter pilots were WASPs, and they made 3/4 of all domestic fighter deliveries with a lower accident rate than male pilots had. Many WASPs became test pilots at overhaul and repair depots, another dicey and anonymous job. Others were assigned to training command as flying cadet navigators, bombardiers, and instrument instructors. About 100 WASPs were sent directly from AT-6S to B-26 Marauder transition. At that time, the B-26 was considered by some to be the most difficult and dangerous USAF aircraft. The WASPs did as well as the men at flying the bomber and much better in ground school. After completing the course, many WASPs flew B-26s on tow-target missions to train aerial gunners. A few visited B-26 transition bases as a confidence builder for male pilots who did not regard the Marauder as user-friendly. In its early days, the B-29 also had a bad reputation. Lieutenant Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, of Enola Gay fame, checked out 2 WASPs, Dora Doherty and Dorothea Johnson, in the B-29 and sent them to a heavy bomber base to reassure nervous B-29 students. The air staff, when it learned of Colonel Tibbets's ploy, directed that WASPs were not to fly the B-29 again. Perhaps the most unusual WASP flying experience was that of 29-year-old Ann Baumgartner, who was sent to Wright Field, not as a pilot but as a consultant on new flying equipment. She soon persuaded the brass to let her fly P-51s, P-47 Thunderbolts, a Japanese Zero, and a Bf-109. Ms. Baumgartner also got permission to fly the experimental Bell YP-59 jet fighter, becoming the only American female jet pilot, a distinction she held for almost a decade. In December 1944, as the need for combat pilots declined, the WASPs were inactivated. In its 28-month life, the WASP organization drew 25,000 applicants, 1,830 were accepted, 1,074 won their wings, and 38 lost their lives taking part in a wide range of domestic flying duties. They ferried more than 12,000 aircraft of 78 types, served without military benefits, and were paid two-thirds as much as the male civilian ferry pilots they had replaced. The WASPs frequently endured discrimination, yet many offered to continue ferrying aircraft for $1 a year. In 1949, the newly independent U.S. Air Force offered commissions to former WASPs. The 121 who accepted were assigned to administrative and support duties and did not fly military aircraft again. It was not until 1977 that Congress passed a bill, introduced by Sen. Barry Goldwater, that gave the WASPs honorable discharges and declared them veterans. Their accomplishments during the war reflected courage and determination, paving the way for women to be admitted to military flying training again, but it would be more than 30 years before the road was completed. WASP World War II Museum. The National WASP World War II Museum began in 2002 with a vision of two women, WASP Deanie Bishop Parrish and her daughter, Nancy Parrish. They believed the history of the women Air Force service pilots should be showcased at Avenger Field on the grounds where most of the WASP trained during World War II. Plans to transform this vision into reality began in the fall of 2002 with a presentation to Sweetwater community leaders. On December 9th of that year, a steering committee met for the first time to investigate the museum's feasibility. Incorporation documents were presented to the steering committee in January 2003, and the museum was incorporated in the state of Texas in July 2003. The Sweetwater Chamber of Commerce supported the museum both financially and with key leadership. In September 2003, the museum board of directors leased 55 acres of land at Avenger Field from the city of Sweetwater. The 200-year lease included the land as well as a hangar that had been built in 1929 to serve as the first Sweetwater Municipal Airport. As a continually evolving project, the museum has grown each year. 2009 saw the addition of a Part 19 display, and 2010 improvements included an exhibit featuring Jackal and Cochrane memorabilia. The Congressional Gold Medal presentation to the WASP in March 2010 provided greater national awareness and increased excitement about the story of the women Air Force service pilots of World War II. In 2012, the museum acquired the Stearman followed by the BT-13 in 2017. In 2020, the museum added the UC-78 Bobcat to its collection, making it the fourth out of the 5 original WASP training aircraft. An increasingly diverse board of directors and advisors with members from across the nation enables the museum to continue moving toward achieving its goals. And living WASPs today, according to Kimberly Johnson, the archivist and curator of the WASP Archive at Texas Women's University in Denton, Tex. In July 20, one of the few surviving WASPs, the long unrecognized corps of female pilots who flew vital domestic missions for the Army Air Forces during World War II, she was 103. Mrs. Olson, who through her 20s had scrimped to pay for the flight lessons necessary to obtain a private flying license, was one of more than 25,000 women who applied to be WASPs, one of 1,879 candidates accepted and one of 1,074 to complete the training program, according to Army statistics.